everyone, so in this video we're going to be talking about the subjunctive mood as well as the subjunctive forms of sum and possum. And the subjunctive is actually a lot less expansive than the indicative, which is why we're covering it in only one video rather than 5 or 6. But nevertheless, it's still very, very important. So first I'm going to go through some basics and then we'll move on to conjugating. Okay, so the subjunctive mood is sometimes called the gray area. Let me write that down. Because it's more of an opinion rather than a fact. And you'll understand what I mean once we actually start translating the different forms. Also, there are 4 different tenses of sum. There aren't 6 like the indicative, but 4 tenses, and there is present, imperfect, perfect, and finally pluperfect. And I'll just abbreviate that. And it also exists both in active and passive forms. Both active and passive. So the subjunctive has a variety of uses, and I'm going to go ahead and list some of them right now. But I'm sure you'll encounter a lot more when you study Latin more. Let's see, uses, and it's used for the volative. Let me write that down. And basically what the volative is it's a weak form of a command. Weak command. And it can only be used with the present subjunctive form. Present subjunctive. And finally, it's translated as let blank or should blank. And we'll cover this more on when we start translating. And it can also be used as an optative verb, which is a weak form of wishing. So let me write down optative. And it's a weak form of wishing. Weak wish. And oftentimes the optative is accompanied by utinam, the precursor utinam. And it's always translated as if only blank. So the subjunctive is also used for clauses. And clauses include conditionals and relative clauses and a lot more, but we'll get more into that later on. So now I'm going to go ahead and introduce the present tense conjugation for the subjunctive. And I'll do that in a different color, a bright color. Present tense. Okay, so it's actually quite simple. All you have to do is take your second principal part. Let me write that down. I'll write it in black. Second principal part. Cross off the last 3 letters. Cross off last 3 letters. You're going to add a special connecting vowel. Add CV, special connecting vowel. And finally, you're going to add the endings. Here, let me add endings. And I'll draw a chart for this. And they're actually the same as they're almost exactly the same as the regular present tense, the indicative present tense. But the endings are, well, the only difference is the first person singular, and it's M, S, T, mus, tis, und. So it's actually a lot easier than the present indicative because you don't have to worry about all the special rules for the connecting vowels. And before I tell you the connecting vowels, let me first write down a saying. And it'll make more sense once I explain it. But let me give you the connecting vowels. I'll write them off to the side. And it's we eat a giant liar. Okay, and I'll write some numbers above it too. And hopefully you'll understand soon. 1, 2, 3. And basically, the vowels of each of these words corresponds to the connecting vowel in the present subjunctive tense. And so that means that there is E for first conjugation, EA for second conjugation, A for third conjugation, IA for third IO, and finally you have IA again for the fourth conjugation. And then you just add your endings. It's very easy. And for the passive, you do exactly the same, except you add these endings. And let me label this active endings, and I'll write down the passive endings, and I'll go ahead and write them down now. We start off with our chart. So singular, plural, 1, 2, 3. And the endings are oris, ter, mer, mini, intor, untor. Okay, and by the way, the reason I'm not translating these forms is actually because it depends on how this subjunctive is used for the way it will be translated. And good news, the imperfect is even simpler. Let me write down imperfect, different color, imperfect. This is the imperfect subjunctive, and there's only 2 rules. All you do is jot down your second principal part or your present infinitive or present active infinitive. You don't remove any letters or anything, keep everything. And then you just add the same endings you did for the present tense. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to copy and paste that below just so it's all in the same place. Let me... with our imperfect. There we go. So if you want the passive, you do the exact same thing, except you add the endings ris, ter, mer, mini, and ter, which is the same thing as above. Active endings, and I'll go ahead and copy and paste this as well below. And sorry, I have to scroll to the top again. Okay, right there. Okay, so now for the pluperfect. And hold on, we'll get to this later. Let me just drag it down more. Sorry about this. And these are actually the forms of sum and possum, which we will cover later on in the video at the end. But first we'll go over our pluperfect and then finally our perfect. So I think that gives me enough room. Okay, so now we're doing the pluperfect, and let me write it down in the same color. Pluperfect. Now again, this is the subjunctive. And what you do is you take your third principal part, different color, third principal part, cross off the I, as we often do, and then you're going to go ahead and add the ending, or add the infix of isse, ISSE. And then you go ahead and add the endings MST, mustasun, as we've already done. I'm just going to write them down here so you have it all in one place. Add endings MST, mus, tis, und. And now the passive pluperfect is a bit different. For that you do almost the same thing as what you do for the perfect passive indicative. So what you have to do, this is active by the way. And now for the passive, You're going to take your fourth principal part, match the ending to the subject, match end to subject, and then instead of adding different forms of sum, you use the imperfect subjunctive form of sum, which are, I'll write them down in a chart, essem, esses, esset, essemus, essetis, essent. And if you remember, for the imperfect subjunctive, all you did was take your infinitive and add these endings. So that'll help you remember it. Okay, so now the perfect subjunctive is formed pretty similarly to the pluperfect subjunctive. And let me go ahead and write down, now we're working on the perfect subjunctive. Okay, so for the active, you again take your third principal part and cross off the I. Let me write that down. Third principal part, cross off I. But this time you add the following endings. Add endings, singular, plural, 1, 2, 3. And you add ero, eris, erit, erimus, eritus, erint. And for the passive, let me label active and passive. And passive. Okay, so for the passive, what you're going to do is you're going to cross off your fourth principal part, or cross off end of fourth principal part, and then you're going to add the ending of your subject in the first or second declension adjective endings, which we've done quite often, and accompany it with different forms of sim, which I'll copy below. So you modify subject, make the ending modify your subject, and then you make it accompany the following. So again, it's two separate words, but I'm going to go ahead and write it down. Singular, plural, 1, 2, 3. Sim, sis, sit, simus, situs, sint. Okay, so there you have it. That's how you form all four subjunctive tenses. And now we can go over the sum and possum subjunctive forms, and this is mostly a matter of memorization. So I've made a few charts for you guys, and they're right here. This is the sum subjunctive, and as you can tell, we'll just go through them one by one. So sum is formed pretty much its separate way. If you think about it, if you remember the regular subjunctives, they're formed by taking a special connecting vowel and adding on mst mustus un. If it helps, you can just think of I as sum's special connecting vowel, the I, and just adding on mst mustus unt. And now we'll just go in the order that I introduced the subjunctives. We'll go to the imperfect. What you do is you take, you can tell essay, we went over this already, but essay is the infinitive form of sum, and you just add on the mst mustus unt. Pretty easy, right? And the same goes for the pluperfect. The pluperfect is formed by taking the last letter off of your third principal part and adding the infix ise, then following it by adding the endings mst, mustis, unt. And you can see sum is no exception. And finally, we have our perfect tense, and it was formed again the same way. And again, there's no passive forms of sum or possum, so that makes things a little bit easier. But what you do is you add erim, eris, erit, erimus, eritis, erint to your third principal part minus the last letter. So now we'll just go through possum. As you can see, the present again has all it did was add the prefix pos to the present form, present subjunctive of sim or sum. So it's sim, sis, sit, simu, situ, sint, with just pos added in front of it. And the imperfect, again, was taken by, well, if you remember, the dictionary entry for possum is possum, posse, potui. So posse is the infinitive, and you add on your endings m, s, t, mus, tis, unt. And the same goes for pluperfect and perfect. They're no exception. You take your third principal part, which is potui, cross off the I, add the infix ise, and add m, s, t, mus, tis, unt. And again, perfect's no exception to the rules. You take your third principal part again, cross off the I, and add the endings erim, eris, erit, erimus, eritis, erint. So there you go. These were the subjunctives, present, imperfect, perfect, and pluperfect tenses. Those are the only tenses they exist in. I introduced both active and passive, and sum and possum. Thanks for watching.